You are listening to Fantha tracks.
Because of the following special program, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file. This is Making Tracks. Here are your hosts, Mark Newbold and Mark Mulcaster.
That's not true. That's impossible.
You're listening to Making Tracks. I'm your host, Mark Newbold, and today I'm joined by Brian Volk-Weiss, the producer of Icons Unearthed, Star Wars, a 6-part documentary series screening on Vice TV in the States. He's known for The Toys That Made Us, a number of other shows on Amazon and Netflix, and he had the opportunity to speak to, amongst other people, Marcia Lucas, who was interviewed on screen for the very first time. So this is myself and Brian talking about the show, many things besides, here on a special episode of Making Tracks.
I make documentaries like for the last about 5 years. And, I feel like, we started with toys on a show called Toys That Made Us on Netflix. Then we went to movies that made us on Netflix. Then we went to Behind the Attraction on Disney Plus. And then last year we did a show called The Center Seat, which was all about the 55 years of Star Trek. And that was received very, very well. So I kind of felt like, well, Star Wars inspired my entire career. Maybe I'm ready to do a documentary about it. I didn't know if we would be able to contribute anything new. And the thing that I hope we achieved was that we did a staggering amount of research that led us to a lot of information that I, at least, was not aware of. And that also directly led to us being able to book Marcia Lucas, who, on top of everything our researchers had learned, she also gave us a staggering amount of information I had never heard. So hopefully, we took all that information and made a documentary that will work for people like you and me that, eat, sleep, and breathe Star Wars, but will also work for people that are not like you and me and are, maybe a little more normal.
Getting Marcia, that is such a hook for pulling in people who've been around it for a long time. How did that come together? Because you're the first person to pull this off.
It's funny, with all of these docs we make, you would think it was harder to get Sigourney Weaver than the second AC on, Nightmare Before Christmas. But the truth of the matter is, it is completely random. You never, ever know who's going to be hard or who's going to be easy. On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the hardest, I would say Marcia was a 6, not even a 7, let alone a 10. Because what happened was, and this is not as uncommon as you might think, we interviewed somebody, and after the interview, we were talking, and he was like, who have you gotten? Who haven't you gotten? And I was like, the person I number one want to get is Marcia Lucas. And he was like, oh, well, who have you been talking to? So I gave him the names of the people we had been, email addresses that we had. He's like, no. You got to talk to her assistant. And he gave us the assistant's email and cell phone. It took about 2 weeks of back and forth, and then she agreed to do it. Funny story. I woke up one morning and I was supposed to be flying to New York. And I woke up and I had an email that Marcia had agreed to do it, quote, anytime between tomorrow and 9 days from now. And I literally changed my flight. Instead of going to New York, I went to Hawaii and literally shot her the next day.
Given that she's agreed to do this and that she's somebody that's just not spoken on the subject before, what assurances did you give her that this was going to be the experience that she hoped it would be, if that makes any sense?
It's funny. It's a great question. You really don't give assurances because you can't give assurances, because you never, ever know. Because when you make documentaries like this, like there could be 5 people in a room and those 5 people could see something happen. And then you're talking to them 30, 40 years later.
Yeah.
You could get 5 different versions of events. And I've seen this before. I've seen this many, many times. So you can't give assurances, because I would say conservatively a 10% chance, which is huge, that once you get all the stories from all the people and all the research, when you put everything together, it might be like that one person thinks A, and the other 6 people who were there think B. And what we put in our documentary is a mixture between A and B. And they could be like, that's ridiculous, B never happened. So not only do we not give assurances, when they sign their release, the release is very specific and says, putting this movie together is at our discretion. And, we are doing the best we can to be accurate and honest, but we cannot guarantee you that this is going to be exactly what you want it to be. I think you really need to be transparent with people about what they're signing up for.
One thing that strikes me with a show like, for example, The Toys That Made Us, which I've got to say is an absolute joy to watch and always is, you do seem to enjoy digging right back to the genesis of, in that show, toys, in this, the Star Wars saga. What is it about wanting to discern and divine what made these things happen that grabs you? What makes you want to know this?
So it's funny. I don't think, unless I tell you this, it's obvious, but in my opinion about my own work, which is, again, it's just my opinion. Like I do not believe that just because I think something about something I directed, that's my opinion for my own thing. No one else has to agree with that. But in my opinion, if you really look at all the shows I make, they're really about this delicate relationship between risk and how it relates to success and frequently failure. So I'm always trying to show how things that we take for granted because they worked, they usually shouldn't have worked. And it's very easy to show that because you can point to a million other examples where the thing we're talking about worked and people who tried to do the same thing before or after didn't work. So I think as it relates to, Star Wars and this particular doc, what I really tried to do was show that it was like a billionth of an inch margin that this movie worked. It shouldn't have worked. There were so many things going against it, but they pulled it off. And going back to Toys That Made Us, if you watch all those episodes, you'll see there's a tremendous amount of time spent on risk and failure.
It's always been the same thing. If people knew then what they know now about how Star Wars had so many random factors pulling it into the right place, nobody would have ever tried to make anything like Star Wars, because you just can't get that lightning in a bottle twice.
First of all, I agree 1,000%. But, to me, and I tried to put this in the show, it's not just about Star Wars. It's about, just to say it in a simple way, but I feel like this is an oversimplification, but it's about Lucasfilm and George Lucas. And like I said, we really tried to put a lot of time to make this point clear, but in my opinion, in all of my research, in everything I know, Hollywood and show business, whatever you want to call it, it's about 105 to 110 years old, depending on when you start the clock. There's only one other person that I am aware of that has done in 110 years what George Lucas did, and that's Tyler Perry. And Tyler Perry has not even done what George Lucas did. And what I mean by what George Lucas did, every single other director in that 110-year period, when they direct a successful film and it succeeds, and they direct another one and it succeeds, they go and do it again and again and again. And yes, their upfront fee is increased. Yes, their back-end profit participation is increased, but they're still working for the studio. Look at George Lucas's quote unquote competitors. James Cameron, he has all the money from his career in the bank. Then he does Titanic. He made a bonkers amount of money from Titanic. Why doesn't he self-finance Avatar? No, he goes back to Fox. Steven Spielberg, the greatest director of all time, financially speaking, whatever. Yes, you could say he had Amblin. Yes, you could say he had DreamWorks, but it wasn't the same. He wasn't writing a check. And if you actually look at the DreamWorks library, like I think Spielberg only directed like Amistad and maybe one other movie. Like everything else he did was for Universal. So then you go to George Lucas. He has American Graffiti, it does well. He does a mostly traditional deal for Star Wars. And then the movie's a hit. Fox wants to bankroll Empire Strikes Back. And Lucas, instead of saying, okay, like every director before him and after him, he gets a bank loan for $20 million. That almost bankrupts him, by the way. Empire Strikes Back comes out. It does great. And then he writes a $30 million check. And then 19 years later, he writes a $100 million check. Nobody has done this. And I don't think this gets enough attention about how insane it was that he did it. And more importantly, that it worked. I mean, there was no guarantee Empire Strikes Back would work just because Star Wars did, A New Hope. So and we got a lot of the answer to that question from Marcia, because she was there.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video, and social media feeds, bookmark FanthaTracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
There's a lot of, I hope this is the right phrase, it's almost like conversation around the kitchen sink feel to what Marcia says, because she was literally there bouncing ideas off each other. Just her part in the whole endeavor, quite beyond what she did as an editor, is vastly underrated. Did that come across to you even more when you sat across her and spoke?
Absolutely. 100%. Yes. And in the doc, in my opinion, I would say 20% at the most of what she's talking about is as it relates to her being the ex-wife, and at least 80% is about her editing. And it's not just the editing. I mean, she had a lot of influence on especially A New Hope, like even scenes she didn't cut, like ideas she had. I mean, I think you can all but guarantee saved the movie.
What did you learn whilst pulling this together about Star Wars? Being a fan of many years yourself, what did you learn that really surprised you, that you came away from, whether you were editing or just filming it or whatever it might be, going, wow, I thought I knew this, but I did not know that? What moment, without giving anything, we've seen the first episode, so without giving too much away, was there a moment where you really stood back and thought, wow, I had no idea?
I mean, there were a million moments. I mean, just almost every interview, we learned something that I didn't know. And again, this has been my lifelong hobby. I mean, I eat, sleep, and breathe Star Wars since I was 5. I'm in show business because of Star Wars. So like almost every interview. And by the way, part of the reason we're able to almost always get new information from people we're interviewing is we watch their old interviews. So we know what they've been asked and we know what they've said. And we go out of our way to ask new questions to get new information. But I mean, we learned tons of stuff. We learned huge stuff. I'm curious to see if you knew this. I never heard this before. Apparently Fox, because they were so over budget and behind schedules, Fox very seriously put a lot of pressure on everybody to not film the end battle and just have the movie end with them escaping the Death Star. Did you know that?
Did not know that. No, I did
not know that either. So if you didn't know that and I didn't know that, that's pretty crazy. So yeah. So, and again, we have at least 2. I think we have 3 people who confirm that. Like there was mind-blowing stuff like that. But then there was also small kind of stupid stuff that was like just the greatest stuff in the world. Like, do you know how Salacious Crumb got his name? apparently, like, everybody at ILM was like out one night pretty drunk, and Phil Tippett was like shit-faced and slurring his words. And what he meant to say was, "Wait up, guys, I need to tie my shoelaces." And he ended up saying something like, "Wait up, guys, I lit a salacious crumb." And that literally became Salacious Crumb. Like, that's so we've got these little stories like that. And then these really big things as well. You know, one of the other big things was Marcia made it extremely clear in a way that I had not understood before, how it was actually George Lucas's father who is, for all extent and purposes, the best answer to the question of why George built Lucasfilm the way he did. You know, his dad was like, "You got to be your own boss. You got to be your own boss. You got to own your own company." And for whatever psychological reason, because they had a very complicated relationship, George, who did not listen to him on many things, George not only listened to him about that, but, you know, took it to a whole new level.
That was really interesting, the shadow that his father has over his life, and the focus that you put on that, because we kind of knew that his dad was quite stern. He owned the shop. That was the destiny he wanted for George, and it kind of translates to Luke destiny in the film, and so on and so forth. But to the degree that it's used as a framework in the first episode, certainly, you've kind of just said it, but that was something that came from the conversation with Marcia, that this was a keystone of his psyche almost, that drove him to want to satisfy his dad, make his dad go just once, go, "Well done, kid," but never quite did.
That's exactly right. Because I asked her the exact same question I asked you, where I was like, you know, the whole thing with Tyler Perry and Spielberg and Cameron, like, I asked her the exact same question, because I've been wondering that, you know, almost my whole life. And that was her answer. She went into this very deep dive about George's dad, and the relationship that they had. And that's an arc over the entire series. You know, it's 6 episodes. And we're talking about, you know, his dad in Attack of the Clones as much as we do A New Hope. It's a huge story.
Hey, this is Lauren Mary Kim, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
When you pitch this, who do you pitch this to? What open doors do you require? What nods do you need to make this happen? Because Lucasfilm is a huge organization, but of course it's now part of Disney. So there's all these other facets to the story. What did you need to do to satisfy the right people that this was a legit, it's not a hatchet job, it's an honest from the heart piece that you've wanted to put together for years? How do you assuage anybody's concerns in that regard?
Well, we do things a little differently. So we're completely independent. I mean, we did not work with Disney or Lucasfilm in any way, shape, or form making the doc. So, and again, as I was saying earlier, like, we could not be more transparent about that. And, you know, going back to your question, you know, because, again, starting with Toys That Made Us, we now have a reputation within the community of the work that we do. You know, some people like it, some people don't, but luckily it seems like more people like it than not. And we also kind of know where everybody is now because of Movies That Made Us. I mean, we've basically been casting documentaries for 4 years. So we basically, so that's the first part. The second part is I independently finance these shows. So we own the series and we license it out. So we don't really pitch the show in a traditional sense, where once we internally greenlight and start production, we then go and start talking to the whole world. So for this show, for example, Vice was our domestic partner, but I mean, we're also partnered, well, I'm not supposed to say yet, but we have some international partners. So, you know, we basically raised on paper a significant percentage of the budget, but by no means all of it. And then we just go make the show.
Were there ever any instances when you came to a story where person A that you spoke to recently has said one thing and person B has said another? How do you discern which is the line that you want to take, or do you give both opinions?
So first of all, what you just described, that happens A lot. I mean, all the time. So we definitely have very systematic ways of dealing with it. One way is, and there's a lot of ways, but I'm going to give you just a few main ways we deal with it. One way is we do massive amounts of research on top of what we've already done to see who's right. We will also go back to people we've already interviewed and get their opinions. And sometimes we will even call people that have not agreed to let us interview them, but we're friends with, and we will ask them and they will tell us off the record, no, that guy's full of shit, like you, da-da-da-da-da.
Yeah.
So and then I would say 85 to 90% of the time, it's very obvious who is being accurate and who is, for whatever reason, not being accurate. And then, of course, we will go with the accurate story. The other thing we will do, if all of our research and all of our back interviewing doesn't work, we will show both sides of the story. And very, very, very rarely, and this only happens for legal reasons, we won't put the story in at all. That happens less than 1% of the time, but more than 0% of the time.
When you've wrapped it, when you've finished it, when you've taken it to Vice and your other international partners, and hopefully we get to see it in the UK, because I know there's a lot of people here very keen to see it.
You will. I signed that contract a couple of days ago.
Going back to the heart of it, take out the business, take out your professional side, but going back to the kid that loves Star Wars and has grown up with it, what was your big takeaway from this whole project? This
is going to sound so cheesy. So I'm worried I'm actually going to blow up the internet with what I'm about to say. Like this is, I don't care if you've done 1,000 shows. I'm about to say the cheesiest thing you've ever heard. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
You know that scene in Back to the Future when Marty McFly is on stage and his parents are not kissing and his hand starts to disappear?
Yeah.
The entire time we're making this show, I see how fragile this was. And I'm like, if that didn't go like that, if that didn't go like that, if that didn't go like that, I would probably be a dentist in Queens and not living in Hollywood and like having the best life I ever could have had. Like it was just so fragile. It shouldn't have worked. And like, I didn't understand, with all my decades of studying the movie, studying is in quotes, I didn't understand how fragile it was, because one of the cool things about making a documentary, especially when it's a series, like you really get to focus on something like 24/7. So I've read every book about the making of Star Wars, but there's usually between a year and 5 years in between the books. Like when you're making a documentary like this, you're reading like 5 years worth of books in like 2 months. And then you're interviewing these people. Like you really see like this shouldn't have worked. And then the implications that would have had on my own life, you know? Listen, dentists are great when your teeth hurt. Pretty sure I would not have enjoyed being a dentist as a career path. No offense to any dentists out there.
It's a joy to speak to you. It really is. I love all your work and I've really enjoyed the first episode of this. I really hope we get to see more of it soon in the UK.
You will. Actually, it's moving pretty fast.
Wonderful. Brian, thanks for your time and thanks for being the guest. Hopefully we get to speak again in the future.
I would love that, man. Take it easy.
Thanks for listening to this special episode of Making Tracks. If you want to be a part of the action and stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news, visit fanthatracks.com or check out the free Fantha Tracks app through the App Store to follow us on your mobile device. You can reach out to us and send in your listeners' questions by emailing radio@fanthatracks.com. Comment, like and share on any of our social media feeds @Fantha Tracks, and be sure to subscribe, leave a review, preferably a 5-star one, on Amazon Music, Audible, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher or smart speaker of choice. And as always, thanks to James Semple for composing the Fantha Tracks intro. Adam O'Brien for our Making Tracks opening music, and Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers. Remember, tune in to Good Morning Tatooine. It's live Sunday evenings, 9 o'clock UK, 4 PM Eastern and 1 PM Pacific on Facebook and YouTube. And check out Fantha Tracks Radio on Friday evenings at 7 o'clock UK time for new episodes of the Fantha from Down Under, Planet Leia, Desert Planet Discs, Start Your Engines, Collecting Tracks and Cannon Fodder. And we'll see you very soon.
Coming up next on Fantha Tracks Radio, it's another episode of Making Tracks.